So my name's Satyajyoti, if you haven't met me before, and I'm giving the talk tonight. So we're in a theme which is called This Very Day, Waking Up in Everyday Life. So it's about us practicing in our everyday lives. And it's based on a kind of program of practices, of slogans, which are called the 7-point mind training. And they're very old. As we heard last week, there's a great talk last week about where this tradition comes from. They originated in Indonesia a long time ago, and then somebody took them to Tibet and were passed down. And they're in most Tibetan schools of Buddhism practice this 7-point mind training. And it's very brief, very pithy instructions. So some of you will have picked up the text last week, and we've got copies of the text as well, looks like this, to pick up afterwards. And when you read it, you'll go, I don't really know what that means, because it's to be memorized. So the idea is people would memorize it, in oral tradition, they'd memorize them all, and then they would, with their teachers, explore what each point means. And it's basically a set of these instructions that are about how to transform the way that we think and our hearts, our minds and our hearts, so that we think the way that a bodhisattva would think. And in particular, it's about us taking what we might think of as negative emotions and difficult situations as our spiritual path, rather than seeing them as getting in the way of our practice. So one image for this might be alchemy. So for, I think, many hundreds of years, people experimented trying to turn base metals like lead into gold. And there was this sense that they might be able to do that. I don't think they ever succeeded. Anyway, but mind training does succeed. So what we do is we change this base metal of our everyday experience and into spiritual gold. Another image that works very well for me is the image of the lotus, the beautiful lotus, so pure, so clean, and it grows in the mud. Without the mud, there would be no lotus. And without the mud of our lives, all that stuff that we think is really messy and unpleasant and we don't really want to go there, without that, the lotus would not grow. We heard last week that one of the opening lines of the text is, know the meaning of this text. Know the meaning of this text, and the 5 defilements will be turned into the path to enlightenment. So if you understand the text, what is called the 5 defilements will be turned into the path to enlightenment. And basically those 5 defilements is what we think of as difficult mental states. They're the things that when we sit down to meditate, pop into our heads. And can take us away. Things like craving, ill will, anxiety, doubt, a kind of sleepiness or laziness. And instead of thinking we need to get rid of these things out of our mind, what we're going to do is transform them. That's what this teaching is all about. Yeah. So mind training is about transforming the situations of everyday life and the negative emotions they often give rise to into the path of practice. So a later line in the text says, when evil fills the world and its inhabitants, turn adverse conditions into the path to enlightenment. And hopefully on wherever you're sitting, you've got a lovely card, very likely fit in your purse or your pocket or whatever, your phone thingy, which says, turn adverse conditions into the path to enlightenment. And that's what we're exploring today. So what this would mean, that when I face difficulties and challenges, whether they're very small, everyday life ones, which often are the most, ones it's really important to look at, because our lives are made up of those little everyday things. That's where we're setting the karmic conditions of our lives, is in how we respond to the small frustrations of life, as well as how we respond to the big adversity of life as well. So when I face things in life, when it's not going my way, I often feel like I close down. So I kind of coalesce around a sense of myself that needs to be protected. It's separate, different from other people, and I need to look after it at all costs. And I don't really care about the other people. It's like I need to look after myself. So it's like I become really important. And also with that, there can go a bit of a kind of desire to control things so that it's working for me, just for me. So that's what can happen sometimes in adversity. And what we're saying here is actually what we can do is we can practice, and we can instead use those situations that are difficult to develop compassion, to connect with others, to know that everybody else is, probably experiencing very similar things to us. Every time something happens to us, it will also be happening to millions of other beings as well. Other people suffer in the way that we suffer. So we can connect with people when things are difficult for us. We can develop compassion, and we can develop wisdom so that we can understand through our suffering, we can really know in our bodies actually impermanence. We might have an idea about impermanence, but when we face serious illness ourselves, or when we lose a job, or when somebody close to us dies, we really feel and know the meaning of impermanence in a different way. So enlightenment is about developing these two wings of compassion and wisdom. So you can see that we can, through our practice of taking adversity, difficulties as our practice, we are moving towards enlightenment. And it also asks us to change the way we think about situations that we normally see as adverse, like, oh no, bad things are happening, into hooray, an opportunity to practice. Now, hooray might be a bit strong, but at least you can kind of go, oh, okay, it's an opportunity to practice. And actually, that's fantastic, because it means whatever happens to you is an opportunity to practice, whatever. So whether good things are happening to you or bad things are happening to you, you can practice. So I find that really, I feel quite optimistic when I hear that, because it means whatever happens to me, I can practice with that. And it's really annoying, actually, it's really annoying, because a big motivator for me to practice is I don't want adversity. I've got this sense like if I'm a really good Buddhist and do all the good things, well, everything will just be lovely all the time. And I really want everything to go exactly how I want it. And I want these kind of lovely conditions where everything's very quiet, I'm in nature, everyone's very lovely to me, everyone does exactly what I want. It's like, so the idea that adversity just happens to us is really annoying. And one thing that I really love about the Dharma, that's the Buddha's teachings, is that I continually find myself reviewing sort of ideas that I've got, stories that I've got, views that I've picked up from somewhere. I've never really considered them. I've just picked them up along the way. And I've lived from that point, from those views. And actually, sometimes those stories, those views that I've picked up have had a big effect on my life, and they lead to suffering for me, and I'm afraid for others too. And one of those views is that if only I could get everything completely organized, everything would be fine. That it's my fault if everything isn't going fine for me. Do you see what I mean? It's a kind of view that if I, got up early enough, meditated enough, exercised enough, I don't know, got my hair cut properly, wore good clothes, whatever it is, got a proper job, had loads of money, whatever it is, then I could get my life right and it would be great. And actually, that's not true. That's not true. And that's kind of annoying, really. But also really restful, because it means we can give up that kind of, all the time trying to really make things so they work for us perfectly. They're just not going to. Yeah. So I guess one of those views, again, another view is that, I know when something's happening to me, whether it's good or bad. So I'm not this isn't in the ethical sense of something being kind of skillful or not skillful. It's more in the sense of it's kind of going to work out for me in my life. But so if something's pleasant, it's in line with what I want, I think it's good. And if it's not pleasant, then it's bad. And that isn't necessarily true. There's a really lovely story, a Chinese story, that demonstrates this. So there's a farmer, and he has a stallion. He's got some horses on his farm. He's got a stallion, very valuable, and the stallion runs off. And all the neighbours say to the farmer, oh no, you've lost your beautiful stallion. And he goes, we'll see. Then the stallion comes back a few days later, and he's brought a few mares with him. So the neighbours go, oh, that's really wonderful. How marvellous that your stallion's brought some more horses back. And the farmer's like, we'll see. Then one day, the son of the farmer is attempting to kind of tame the mares, and he falls off one of them and breaks his leg. So the neighbours are all like, oh, that's terrible, your son's broken his leg. The man says, We'll see. And then there's a war breaks out in that locality, and the army sends out team to conscript all the young men into the army. But because he's got a broken leg, he doesn't have to go to war. So it kind of like the moral of this story is obvious, isn't it? It's like we never know the consequences of things. So trying to have these value judgments that this is bad or this is good for me actually can give us more suffering than we need. Because I think we're not a very good judge of what is good and bad for us. What we often think of as a bad thing is just a label. It's just a story we tell to ourselves. There's a line from Shakespeare, from Hamlet. There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So it's our views about it. Something that happens to us that we think is bad, somebody else might think is good. You know, it's like we have these views. And it's interesting, you know, if you've done the intermediate course, there's an exercise where we ask people to write down everybody they've ever benefited from. It's a really lovely exercise. So you probably remember it. And interestingly, quite often people will choose somebody who maybe, I don't know, they're in a relationship with and the relationship ended badly, or a teacher they didn't like or something like that. And they'll go, I can see that even though I didn't like this person, I didn't like what happened, I've benefited from it because I've grown through it. So often those difficult times and those difficult things we grow from. And I think we have to be careful with that, don't we? Because some things are so awful and so difficult that you have to be pretty advanced to be able to cope with it. But people like the Dalai Lama, you know, he's got a lot of equanimity about what happened in Tibet, what happened to his people, to a lot of people that he knows. He has a sense that was very good for him and for the people of Tibet. It's good for Buddhism. It got it out into the world. So there is a way that if you're advanced, there is a wonderful line in the 7-point mind training that says, don't put a dzo's load on an ox. And what a dzo is, I think, is some kind of like a big yak, like a female yak or something like that. Yeah. And they're big, they're very hairy, and they're very big and very strong, and you can put a load on them, lots of things to carry. But you can't, if you do that on an ox, it'll kind of, you know, overwhelm the poor old ox and it will collapse. So what it's saying is, when we practice, let's not put a big load on ourselves. So it might be that now, working with adversity, well, really big, difficult things, they do overwhelm us, and that's completely understandable. But what we can do is perhaps work with the smaller things in life. We can train ourselves. And we don't feel bad about ourselves if just because we've heard that adversity can be turned into practice, we don't immediately practice it all the time. It's a training. It's a training that takes years and years and years. So, and that's the kind of words to myself, because I hear things like this and I go, well, why can't I do that immediately? So it's a bit like, but you know, it is a training that we're doing. Okay, so how do we usually judge these situations? Like, we're a bad judge of what's good for us, what's bad for us, and how we often judge them is by what we call the worldly winds. And the Buddha talks about these quite a lot in his early teachings. I have no idea if any people can see this. Can most people see it? Yeah, people at the back, that's pretty good. Okay, so worldly winds. And a lot of what I say about the worldly winds is from this marvellous book called Sailing the Worldly Winds, which I got out of the library. And I think there are some more copies in the library, aren't there? I'm looking at you, the librarian, but there are. And it's a really lovely book, actually. It's not huge, and it's really worth having a read of. I think it's very good. There's a lot more in it than I'm saying today. So these worldly winds are gain, loss, fame, infamy, praise, blame, pleasure, and pain. And basically, we really like these ones. We want loads of these in our lives. All this stuff that's on this side, the gain, the fame, the praise, the pleasure. We think that's what we want. And we really don't like it when we get the stuff on the other side. The loss, the infamy, or not being noticed, being blamed, the pain. And it's completely understandable that we'd rather have the left-hand side, my right-hand side, your left-hand side. But if we just think we can somehow fix things so we just have these, we're really up for a lot of disappointment. Because things change all the time, don't they? And, you know, things happen. Suddenly, something can happen and our lives are really changed. So sometimes we get what we want, that's gain, and sometimes we don't. In fact, we lose things break, Sometimes we feel loved and popular, that's fame. And sometimes we just feel overlooked, ignored. Sometimes people seem to think what we do is great, they approve of it, and they praise us. Other times they criticize us or they censor us, that's blame. Sometimes life can be really pleasurable, full of delight, and other times it's full of painful and discomfort, and we have experienced a lot of discomfort. And of course, in a day, we can run through all of these probably in one day in different ways. And if what we do is we try and put all our happiness on this side, on the winds blowing that way, our moods will blow with the wind. We'll be like happy one day, it's great, everything's great. And the next day we'll be in a spin because we're not getting the gain, the fame, etc. So I kind of got an image here and it stops after a while, but let's just go with it for a bit. So what we need to do is make ourselves like a sea-going vessel. So we've got these winds that blow us about. And we're a bit like an airbed or a lilo on the sea. Like some poor person on the lilo. The wind catches it, out they go to sea. We're just blown about by the external conditions. So what we need to do is make ourselves a really good sea-going vessel. We need to have a really good rudder that goes deep down into the sea, that gives us stability. We need lovely sails that we can adjust to the wind. We even need an engine. And this is a bit where it kind of falls down, because I think we kind of need like an eco-engine that runs off solar power and doesn't kind of make a horrible noise. Because have you ever been on a boat which is sailing and then they turn the engine on and it's like suddenly it's all really horrible and smells of diesel and stuff. So you don't want that. But you want this lovely engine that gives you control, not control, but gives you some kind of, you can decide the way that you're going to steer the boat. And we want to go in the direction that we want. So the direction that we might want to go in is enlightenment, which is a way of being in the world that really understands how things are, is aware, kind, flexible, has equanimity. Because whatever our circumstances in life, even if we're really, young, healthy, talented, etc., we're going to experience loss and gain. And what happens is our ego uses these kind of things as a score sheet. So it's a bit like, oh, somebody's given me £1 million or something. I'm doing really well. Oh no, people are saying bad things about me because they're jealous now that I've got £1 million. That's really horrible. I'm not doing very well. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of like we've kind of got this unexamined views that we pick up from society, that this is great and this is really bad. So we're just going to explore them a little bit more. So gain and loss. So I kind of think it's kind of quite obvious, isn't it, that in its strongest, purest form, that if we had a life that's spent just pursuing possessions and money, just for its own sake, well, it kind of comes to nothing in the end. It's like we don't develop as people. And actually, it might stop us living a courageous, fulfilled life because we'll have to put so much time and energy and into trying to do that. And also in that frame of mind of wanting all the time, we never have enough. So, there are millionaires who really want to be billionaires, aren't there? There are people who've got those massive yachts, loads of material possessions, but they feel really poor because their yacht's a little bit smaller than somebody else's. Do you know what I mean? It's like the fact that we crave things means that actually we feel poor all the time. But even if we don't do that, this kind of gain and loss can be like a quite strong and painful part of life. We just really want things to go our own way, whatever that is. We want to be in the queue in the supermarket that moves really fast. We want to, just all this. We want to find a parking space before somebody else. We want to get on that train and get a seat before somebody else does. We don't like it when we lose something. I had quite a strong experience of this the other day because I live in a community. And actually, we have loads of food, really nice food, very plentiful. I never need to worry about going hungry. But the other day, we had this lovely takeaway curry, which we don't have very often. And I was so anxious that I wasn't going to get the curries that I wanted. It was just really interesting, this real kind of like, hey, I've got to get these curries, which I did. There was loads, of course. It was fine. But that kind of, that like living in that gain and loss kind of mentality. So a way that we can work with this, the way that we can turn gain and loss into being blown about by these winds, the way we can turn it into a path to enlightenment is to develop generosity. Turn it round so that instead of always thinking, what can I get? We turn it into, what can I give in this situation? Let go of all that gain and loss. If I was really enlightened, I'd have gone, please, dear sisters in the community, you have all the favourite curries that you really like. I'll just eat the little bits at the end. No, I wouldn't, that's not it, really. But you know what I mean? But there's a way that the attitude that I had was giving me suffering, you know, if I'd been able to just kind of, you know, anyway, you know what I mean. So turning, instead of thinking, what can I get? What can I give? And just a simple way to practice this is, I think, when we're in a hurry in a busy place. So you might be driving a car, you might be on a bike, or you might be a pedestrian. But if there's loads of traffic or loads of people in the street, I'm kind of going, oh, please don't walk so slowly. I need to get where I'm going. Please, person. And I think just turning it right round and just kind of going, I'm just going to take my time and I'm going to let that person who's walking slowly walk slowly. You know, or if I'm in the car, I'm going to let people in front of me. So just moving away from this sense of wanting, craving, of gain and loss, and being in a way that we can give to the situation. So the second one is fame and infamy. Well, this is status and also being noticed, I think. Infamy, obviously, we don't like it if, you know, like when celebrities get kind of, first of all, they're really famous and then they get really knocked down by the media. That's not great, that's infamy. But we don't, for most of us, it would be more like wanting to be noticed and being worried that people weren't seeing us, we were being overlooked. That's a really kind of common experience. And it's interesting because fame doesn't seem to do many people any good, and yet I still think it'd be great to be famous for some reason. It's like a really wrong view. And I don't know if anyone's seen a film called Elvis by Baz Luhrmann. I found that film really moving because there was Elvis. He was like beautiful. He could sing. He had money. And then he ended up dead at 42. You know what I mean? It just showed, for me, that film really strongly showed that just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So how do we perhaps turn this one around? Well, we can develop a strong sense of our individuality. So we know our own value and what we think is important. We know our own value and we know our own values, actually, what we care about. So that whatever our status in the world, whether we're low down in the eyes of the world or people we care about, or we're high up, that we're steering our own boat on its own course. And we know what's important to us. And that's an individuality. That's knowing that even if people around us have different thoughts, you know, some of us may have family who think that some of the things that we do aren't appropriate, aren't right, etc. We just very strongly need to have a sense of we know what's right for us, and based on principles, based on ethics. And I think that individuality is really important. It's different from individualism. Individualism is that kind of approach to life, which is like, life is about what I want. I'm not going to join any groups. It's all about I know best, I know kind of thing. That's not individuality. And the person who's an individual can be in a group, work in a group really well when it's part of, when it's important to do that. The third one is praise and blame. Oh dear, this is the one that I always go, I really kind of cringe because I think I really love praise and I really hate blame. I don't think I'm alone in that, really. But so if we really care for others to approve us or disapprove of us, well, we just never become our own self because we're just ruled by others' opinions. And it's quite big for me, actually, because I do get nervous if I think somebody doesn't approve of what I do. Even, interestingly, that's just their opinion. You know what I mean? It's just like people aren't going to approve of a lot of things I do. The role that I have at the centre, which is being the chair of the centre and therefore quite upfront, has helped with that. Because sometimes people like things I do and sometimes they don't like things I do. And there's something about I need to just, steer my course through that. And in Vajragupta's book, he tells a story that's really helpful. He talks about how it's a retreat for newcomers. So there's a residential retreat for newcomers. His friend introduced people there to bowing to the shrine. So she talked about how we're bowing to our highest potential. Do it if you want to, you don't have to do it, etc., etc. And she suggested, why not try it out? If you'd like to, you don't have to, but you could try it out. And at the end of the retreat, she was handed 2 bits of paper and she put them in her pockets to read later. And so first of all, she pulled out one from her left pocket and it said, "Thank you for leading the retreat. It was great. I loved the way you introduced bowing. It really moved me and I thought it was a wonderful part of the retreat. Thank you." Then she pulled one out of her other pocket and it said, "Thank you for leading the retreat. I really enjoyed it, but I was so sad that you introduced bowing because it really ruined it for me." So it's just like, like if she'd got praise and blame there in her pockets, So a way to transform this is to develop a strong sense of truthfulness. So knowing ourselves, what's true and what isn't, and of trusting ourselves. Because remembering that praise and blame is just the opinion of somebody else. And what we need to do is have a trust of what we're doing and the motivation for what we're doing. And I've got a little story for this one. So this is about Hakuin. Hakuin is a Japanese monk, a poet. At this time, he was an old monk, and he was living in a village in a little hut. And one night, there was a knocking on the door of his hut, and it was the family of a young unmarried woman, and she'd just given birth. And they were absolutely furious with him. First of all, they handed him the baby. He said, "Here's the baby." And he said, the woman had said that Hakuin was the father of the baby. And they were really angry with him. They really blamed him. So he said he was shameful, dirty old man, he's a disgrace to his robes, etc. So really a lot of blame. So he just bowed and said, "Is that so?" So then he looked after the child for quite a few years, completely on his own, single-handedly looked after the child, taught her to draw art, fed her, etc., etc. And then the family turned up again because the girl had admitted that actually Hakuin wasn't the father, and they turned up to claim the child. And this time they were going, "Oh, Hakuin, thank you so much. You've been so generous. You were great. What a great job you've done of bringing up this girl. It's fantastic." But all he did was he bowed again and he said, "Is that so?" So if we can develop an attitude of, "Is that so?" that will really help us when somebody gives their opinion. Okay, so the last one is pleasure and pain. We seek pleasure, we avoid pain. Of course we do. Completely average, normal thing to do. It'd be really weird if we didn't actually. But we also know, don't we, that we can't just seek the pleasant and avoid the pain. Like, we probably wouldn't be here if we did that, because there would have been a bit of pain, and what have you had to do to get yourself here, probably. We just don't achieve much if we just always go with the pleasant. And in fact, if we always go with the pleasant, in the long run, we might have more pain. If we don't look after our bodies and our minds, we don't exercise, we don't eat well, etc. In the long run, we will suffer from that. And I think there's some pain in anything worth doing, whatever it is. So whether it's your work, relationships, your leisure activities, there'll be something involved. Even doing a jigsaw puzzle can be really annoying sometimes. So like whatever it is that we're doing, there'll be pain. And I think a way that we can transform this seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, is through mindfulness. Is through being aware of what's going on for us. So mindfulness can really help us when we're experiencing pain, because what we can do is bring awareness to what the actual pain is and not give ourselves any extra stories, not give ourselves what's called the second arrow. The second arrow is when we experience some pain and then we start to tell ourselves loads of stories about it, like it's going to go on forever, I can't bear it, it's not fair, it's awful, I'll never get better, whatever it is, those stories just give us extra suffering. So if we're mindful, we can just be with the pain. And if we're mindful when we're having some pleasant experience, well, we can just really enjoy it, but know that it's not going to be permanent. Okay, so this is a very quick run through it all. Really recommend the book. So basically, when we face a difficult time, we can think, well, these are certain situations that come up for a lot of people. So the first is, if a person is difficult, we find a person is difficult, we can think, well, that's an opportunity to really practice metta, to practice non-reactivity. It's an opportunity to practice kshanti, which is a word we talked a lot about in the last series. But very briefly, kshanti means forbearance, patience, of just being with somebody, even if we're finding them difficult. If we lose money or status or experience discomfort, again, that's an opportunity for kshanti. It's an opportunity for us to work out what really we want in life. And if we meet blame or disapproval, it's an opportunity for honesty and an opportunity to develop individuality. So the mind training tells us that, asks us to tell a different story about what's good or bad. Situations we'd normally think of as bad can be good for us because they give us an opportunity to practice and grow. It's spiritual body building. In fact, if life was always easy with no dukkha, we probably wouldn't bother. It's like we just wouldn't bother, would we? We just live this lovely life of ease and we wouldn't practice at all. Yeah, but we need to train ourselves in it. So as I said, we need to be really, take it steady. Don't put the weight, whatever it is, the burden of the zo onto the ox. And I think there's a few things that I'll just briefly say that we can do. This first is connecting with others in adversity, which we'll talk about later. Other people suffer. And if we can just think that, if we think when we've got toothache, there are millions of other people getting toothache, we can connect with people. I know that just after my dad died, I'd look at people in the street and wonder if they'd also suffered a bereavement quite recently. And it felt very connecting. There was something about a kind of connection in terms of that, the bereavement, etc. And the other thing is we can look for the reality teaching that we're getting, the wisdom aspect. So life is complex, it's ever-changing, we can't control it. We've got this view, somehow it'll all be fair, it'll all come all right in the end, but it won't, actually. There is impermanence, things change, and that can be really painful. So we will get a reality teaching when things are difficult. So we don't need to go and seek out our adverse conditions, but next time we find ourselves in a difficult place, which might be in the group in a minute, it might be in the tea break, maybe on the way home, we can just approach it a little bit differently. We can think, oh, I don't like what's happening here. Can I have a bit of a gap? Can I respond differently? Can I work out, is it one of these worldly winds that's going on? Someone else in the group's getting all the attention, they're overlooking me, what's going on for me there? Can we respond differently? And every time that we do that, we don't just benefit ourselves, we don't just become happier, which we do, but we benefit others. Because if we can be calm, if we can be not blown around by this wind so much, well, that's a great gift for other people. And over the next few weeks, we're going to hear more about how we can turn adverse conditions onto the path. So by compassion, by wisdom, by practices that we can do. And next week, I think will be really good because we're going to have 3 short talks, personal talks about people of how they've actually turned their adverse conditions into their practice. So I really recommend that one. Okay, so we have got homework. So last week we had homework, actually. The homework was to do nothing every day and see how you experienced that and see what you turned to, if you did. So we'll talk about that in the groups, those people who were here last week, if you remember to do it and what you did. But we're going to also take this slogan on our card, turn adverse conditions into the path to enlightenment, as so we're going to, in the groups, think of something that's coming up in the week. So maybe you've got a meeting at work, maybe you've got a difficult family member you're going to see, whatever it is, something that's going to happen in the week. And how could you think differently about it? How could you use it to practice kindness, awareness? So that's the homework, talk about that in the groups. And of course, you may want to also talk about the worldly winds. Which ones do you particularly relate to? Which ones really blow you around?